Good day, everybody. This is the part two of my series on dealing with grief. Yesterday I mentioned that grief can affect us in many areas of our lives, emotionally, mentally, physically, socially, and spiritually. And there are other ways too, financially, materialistically. I mean, it can really enter in lots of areas of our lives. But let's cover some of those because a lot of people think grief is just an emotional experience. It's just the sadness of missing someone who has died, which of course is true, and that's part of the emotional effects that we talk about in grief counseling and so forth. However, it can be much broader of an experience than people anticipate, and then it can get overwhelming quickly. So emotionally, dealing with grief, again, is probably the most obvious to all of you, whether you've been through it or not. And that means, your emotions can swing really wide, and you can get moodier than normal, more sensitive than normal, maybe have some intense sadness. A lot of grief symptoms, emotional symptoms, look like depression symptoms. So often doctors will lovingly prescribe antidepressants thinking that it's depression, but it's actually grief. So be careful about that. Be careful about that because an antidepressant, if you have a chemical imbalance in your body that's causing you depression, then antidepressants could create balance for that. But if you're but if your issue is you're grieving heavily, a pill isn't going to change the circumstances. Okay, so what will change those circumstances? Well, we'll talk about that too. But let's move on. So intense emotional reactions to grief is very common. Again, ride the wave of your emotions, accept your emotions, and be very kind to yourself through them. Try not to take it out on yourself or other people. That's the main thing. Okay, so mentally, what are grief symptoms, mental symptoms? This is, like I mentioned yesterday, so I'll just briefly remind you, if you didn't see it, that forgetfulness is common, lack of concentration, lack of focus. So people who have enjoyed, for example, lifelong reading novels for pleasure and want to, still, but they're grieving, they may not be able to sit there and really process what they're reading and comprehend what they're reading. So it may become a frustrating activity during this time, and they think, well, why can't I do this? I've loved to read for 50 years. And it's like, well, you're grieving, so you may not be able to put the words together and comprehend right now because concentration can be affected. So those are some examples of mentally being affected by grief and symptoms of grief. So if you forget to pay the bill you've paid on the first of the month for the last 10 years, if you're driving somewhere you've driven many times and then you suddenly kind of get disoriented and you're like, where am I? You're not losing your mind. You're not crazy. You're just mentally affected by your grief. Okay. Then physically, okay, there can be many physical symptoms, reactions to grief. For example, people may experience raised anxiety, which plays out in the body sometimes by sweating, shaking, the heart palpitating, blood pressure going up, things like that. But I think the biggest physical symptoms I've heard about over the years are stomach aches, like just a dull ache in the gut, like a ugh feeling of just a dull, long ache in the stomach, and or an upset stomach. A lot of unnervedness, that causes stomach upset, irritable bowel syndrome, just not digesting food as well. Things like that can sometimes be a result of grief. And then headaches, migraines increasing, headaches and migraines increasing with people, and lack of sleep or wanting to sleep all the time. So a physical response to grief sometimes is not being able to like close your eyes and shut down for the night. This can be for 1,000 reasons. You're not, you're just being so upset, or you're being stressed about the future now because of how your life's changed because this person is deceased, or just fear of sleeping that you won't wake up, or fear of nightmares, or fear, just, or not feeling good, and not being able to relax, all kinds of things. Or people who want to sleep all the time and not get out of bed, just that, like, what's the point? Feeling so down and so forth, or just there's just no physical energy left at all, because it takes so much energy to grieve and just put one foot in front of the other sometimes. So, and then there's interrupted sleep, where people will wake up at 1 and at 3 and at 5, and and they, they're either dreaming a lot, or they're just not able to really get a good night's rest. So again, just know that that's a common physical reaction to grief, and you are not losing it. It's just you need to grieve. Okay, you need to grieve, and we'll talk more about that. Okay, socially, people are affected by grief. Their roles sometimes feel like they've changed. For example, people who have an only child die, are they still parents? I mean, they are. Their child is just deceased, not just, but is deceased. But it really changes that role, because maybe they were still, in school and in activities, and the parents, maybe the parent was the Girl Scout leader, and now her girl is deceased, and then what does she do? Does she keep being the Girl Scout leader? Is that too painful, too difficult? You maybe all your friends are parents, and your social life is sitting on the benches at the games, and now your child is deceased, and it's like, what do you do with yourself? You don't really fit into the parenting groups anymore, but yet it's been your whole life in a way. So it can really mess with things socially. Another big kind that happens is when a spouse dies. And maybe you've had all couples friends, or maybe are you still a husband if your wife dies? Do you still feel comfortable hanging with the couples, or do the couples feel comfortable hanging with you? Not always. I mean, it's sad to say. Sometimes people move through this beautifully, but it can be awkward for some, and it's just hard to know what to do. Everybody's confused about what to do in that situation. So, so our roles might change, and our expression and activities in our life may change because of who has died, and so it can be very, very socially confusing. And sometimes you have to find a new avenue to express yourself socially because of the changing roles in your life. So that's and we don't see this coming. We don't realize, oh, this is coming. Most of the time when we're facing grief, we don't realize that could be a piece of it, actually. And then I mentioned financially, and I think this is obvious, that some people's finances change dramatically when somebody dies. Sometimes people have, their parents die and they inherit a fortune or a whole set of problems financially, or properties, or debts, or it can go either direction, or inherit lots of money and property and be overwhelmed with that part. Just sorting through everything materialistically and financially is generally stressful for people when they are in that position. No matter what the bank accounts say or how much there is, that's a whole other way that people are affected by grief. So, and then if you're a spouse and your spouse dies and you're used to 2 incomes and living that way, and now you're down to 1 or none, that can be very difficult. I've known a lot of people who lose their homes after a spouse dies because they can't keep it up financially on their own. And so, things can change dramatically financially in lots of ways and and sometimes there's outstanding medical bills that are so overwhelming that you feel like you'll never get out from under those. So things like that come along that just add to the frustration, add to the stress, add to the fear, add to the unknowing part of grief that everybody faces in some ways. Then spiritually, I don't think I've ever known anyone, and I've known a lot of grieving people over the years, and I've grieved myself several times, and I don't think any of us get by unscathed without asking some deep philosophical questions when we've had a loved one die, in whatever way they've died, or whatever time in their life they've died, or what circumstances are around it. I think those of us who have a spiritual life or some kind of belief in something bigger than ourselves are likely to ask some pretty intense questions. The biggest question is I've heard people ask is why? Why did this happen? Why now? Why my loved one? Why not me? That, you know, we we don't understand things. We don't. Why does one person get sick and heal and the next one doesn't and dies? How come, the car went across the median in this moment when it was my loved one on the highway and not, another time, or somebody else, or or only the drunk person? Why is it the sober person? I mean, not that we want the drunk person to die either. Yeah, I don't mean that, but you know what I'm saying. We ask those questions like, how could this be? Why is this happening? And who's in charge? Was this fate? Was this an act of God? Or why didn't God intervene and heal this person? So, or whatever you call God in your life, or divine, whatever whatever your word is fine. But I find people can question their faith and may even give up on their faith, or change their faith, or change their mind about their faith, and be angry that something, there wasn't a miracle in the form that they wanted, or or feel punished. There's just a lot of wrestling with that. And so what I hope for most people is that they can eventually, if not right in the beginning, but eventually find strength in their belief system, find hope in their belief system. But usually there's a little wrestling match, or a big one, that goes on for people because they're so affected. And then if you're a religious person, some religions believe in life after death and eternal life and a heaven experience. Some religions believe that when you die, that's it. We put you in the ground and that's the end of the story. There's nothing to look forward to, or no reunion anticipated when we die, that we won't go be with loved ones. So depending on your religious understanding and perspective, you can really experience death in a very different way. Like for me, I really believe I'll be with my loved ones again someday. That's where I'm at in my head about it. And so that gives me comfort. That gives me hope that there's more to come, and a reunion, someday. And so I feel better because of that. So that helps me. So I have a belief system that serves me well in dealing with grief. But not everybody has that. And there's all kinds of philosophical and religious perspectives. So anyway, I think most people, no matter where they are on that grand scheme of options there, will question things spiritually when they have someone close to them die. And that's very common. So, but very upsetting to people. Beliefs they've relied on for years aren't comforting sometimes, or they question them, which is an upheaval, again, another kind of upheaval. So those are some ways that we're affected by grief. Those are symptoms in different areas of your life that you may not have expected. You may have expected, well, I'm going to feel sad and miss this person, but I didn't realize this could happen, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. Or I didn't realize, oh, those things are happening to me right now. Oh, that's what that is. If you can't explain something that's going on with you mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, socially, financially, whatever, in any other way, you might look at your grief and go, oh, that's the root cause of this. So another thing to keep in mind is that for some reason, the research shows us that grief can go in waves every 3 months. For some reason, most people at the 3rd month after the death, the 6th month, the 9th month and the 12th month go through waves of grief. So you may go along for a while and think I'm managing this pretty well, and then like it'll be month 6. You won't know it's month 6, but all of a sudden you'll think, gosh, why did I just take a turn downward? I was doing pretty well, and I don't understand it. I know there's a lot of things in life that goes in cycles, but it is amazing, statistically speaking, how those upsurges of grief can happen every 3 months for many people. So it may just be you're cycling back around and revisiting some things coming up again for you. And so if that happens, just go, oh, there it is, showing itself again. And what do I need to do? How do I breathe through this? How do I work through this? So those are some facts and symptoms and things to expect with grief that can happen. The best way to help yourself grieve is to grieve. There's no cure to grief per se. We just learn to manage it differently as we ebb and flow through life. So the greatest way is to allow yourself to actively grieve. Honor it. You need to do it. It's okay. And for some, that means crying it out, talking it out, talking over the details of the death again and again and again and again. For some, it's quietly journaling about it again and again and again. For some, it's going on runs and punching the bag hanging off your ceiling in the basement. So physically exerting, releasing the stress of it, the grief of it. Memorializing the person in some way. This is really why we have funerals and services and celebrations of life and things like that, is for us, those of us surviving it, to do some remembrance and feel like we're honoring the person in some way and gathering around others who share that experience with us. But there's other ways to do it too. I'll give you an example before I go for today. I had a girlfriend of mine die about 16 months ago now. And she had a knee surgery, a routine knee surgery, and that seemed to go well. And then a few weeks later, developed an infection, and everything went wrong, and it consumed her body, and she was in kind of a comatic state for a long time, and then she died. It was terrible. I was just like, what? I couldn't believe it. But anyway, nobody could believe it. So it was a very shocking turn of events. Very sad. But anyway, she was a friend of mine from Iowa, and we were very close for many, many years. And she's a cat lady like me. And we would share our cats and watch each other's cats when we went on vacation and things like that. And so we shared that love of cats. It's one of our big in common things. We had others and so forth, but that's one of my big associations with her. Well, anyway, her nickname, this woman's nickname, her real name is Cheryl, but her nickname was Pebble. And I called her Cheryl, but people who'd known her all her life and things like that often referred to her as Pebble. Well, anyway, so she died in December of 2015. Yeah, 2015. And I had a cat die a while before that. And so I finally got a new cat in June of 2016. And I looked at this cat, and I was going to name it all kinds. I thought of other names and everything, and then all of a sudden it hit me. This is Pebble. I'm going to name this cat Pebble in honor of her. So I really did, and I like the definition of pebble. I looked it up. It's like a small stone, a little rock, often found in rivers, beaches. I'm a water girl, as you know, beach person, big time. Anyway, so that all fit, and I thought, oh yeah, Pebble's my little rock, and Cheryl was one of my rocks in my life for many 20 years or whatever, and I thought, oh, what a way for me to honor Cheryl in this thing we share together, cats. And also the meaning of it's just wonderful, a wonderful symbol of how I looked at Cheryl and how I look at this cat being a new little rock in my life. And so that's a little way that I have memorialized her and honored her. And it makes me feel good. And it makes me think of her all the time. And Anyway, so okay, so that's what we'll cover for this time. Please be good to yourself. Grief is a challenge, but many, you can survive it. You can survive it too. Just really, really honor yourself in your grief, and we'll talk more about it later. Have a good day.